It's game time.
What's up, Internet? Let me tell you, I woke up super early this morning. In fact, the only thing that woke me up was the fact that I was hungry. And I know you're probably wondering where I'm going with this. Just give me a sec here. So while I was making my breakfast this morning, I spent the entire time ranting about something. For no real reason, but by the time I was finished my breakfast, I felt that I had made some decent points, and I kind of wanted to just record it. Because I didn't really want to lose my train of thought, you know? So here's the broad statement I'm trying to make here today. Shadow the Hedgehog. The character, not the game. Well, yes, the game too, but not the center of focus for this argument. Shadow the Hedgehog, the character, is complete and total bullshit. Let me work my way to that end statement for a minute. I like to think that Shadow the Hedgehog was kind of analogous to one of my favorite Star Wars characters, Han Solo. In that, by the end of the first episode, in Star Wars' case it was the original Star Wars, and in Shadow's case it was Sonic Adventure 2, by the end of it you had a very complex and deep and interesting character. I mean, let's just work with the introductions here. In Han's case, you had a character who was a mercenary. He seemed to always be very in it for himself. I mean, in his introduction, he kills a man in cold blood. Likewise, in Shadow's case, you had a character who wished ill on all humanity, simply because they took away someone very dear to him. Now, these might be very extreme perspectives to have, but at the same time, they're also very understandable and relatable. Mercenary work is something people do in order to survive. Likewise, if someone hurt someone dear to me, I wouldn't take that sitting down, and I don't think any one of you would either. But by the end of it, you have a character that has sort of revealed their hand and truly redeemed themselves as a good character. In Han's case, it was going back and saving Luke. And in Shadow's case, it was trying to sacrifice himself to save all of humanity, which, yes, he did put them in that position to begin with, but at the end of the day, it was trying to realize the wishes of his loved ones, and at the end of the day, not necessarily destroy all of humanity, but to be loved, because everything was taken away from him. That makes these characters not only very believable, but very powerful characters. They are willing to sacrifice themselves in order to help the greater good. And because of this, you have some of the most powerful, interesting, complex, and believable characters in that medium. I mean, hell, Shadow might be the only character that actually had a proper character arc that was well written. So at this point, you're probably saying, well, you've effectively just said that these characters are the best in their respective media. So why is your end result that these characters are bullshit? And I got no problem with Han, it's all Shadow at this point. But at this point, it's because, well, in Han's case, George Lucas decided to George Lucas all of the original Star Wars movies, and in Shadow's case, it was because Sonic Heroes had to happen. They decided to bring the character back because marketability, I'm guessing, or something. But at the end of the previous game, Shadow had sacrificed himself to save all of humanity. So what were they gonna do? Well, they kind of played it off like at the end of Sonic Adventure 2, he might have been saved, he might have not been. And to this point, unless I've missed something in one of the awful Sonic the Hedgehog games I chose to skip, they kind of never really touch on whether he was the original or a clone or a robot or whatever. But bringing him back hurts his character incredibly. And here's why. First and foremost, Shadow the Hedgehog chose to sacrifice himself to save all of humanity at the end of Sonic Adventure 2. You know, as we've established. But the fact that he survived diminished his actions entirely. And the reason for this is quite simple. I mean, if you or I had the ability to fix all the world's problems at the cost of our own lives, would we do it? That's a very powerful moral question to ask. I mean, on one hand, you'd be saving so many people, but on the other, you'd have to sacrifice everything you are. That's quite a powerful statement to make. In fact, it's one of the most powerful that I could think of. Shadow the Hedgehog chose to do this at the end of Sonic Adventure 2, which is amazing. But if you take it from the perspective that he survived, you could almost say that he knew from the outset that this wouldn't do anything to him. And this diminishes the entire the Hedgehog, a clone or a robot. This almost makes it worse, because not only does it diminish the effect that Shadow the Hedgehog had initially, but the end result is a less complex and interesting character because of it. See, if Shadow died and now there's a copy of him running around who's either a robot or a clone or whatever, it's already been established that this character really doesn't have any memory, which means he lacks the various aspects that had set the original Shadow on the path that he did. Which means he doesn't really have any love for humanity, he doesn't really have any sense of self-sacrifice, he doesn't really have any sort of character arc, because they took it all away from him, because this is a different character with no memories. And if your argument is that the game Shadow the Hedgehog was his character arc, I would argue that that's maybe even worse, because not only were there like 13 different endings to that game, but they were all really unsatisfying and terrible. And the quote-unquote true ending of that game was to throw away the one plot point the entire game had by saying, yeah, this guy doesn't know who he is, it doesn't matter. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad point, is to erase a character's history and to effectively make them relearn who they are, but to just drop a massive plot point like that is awful. But getting back on track here, you have a character who's effectively lost his history. And while it's not necessarily a bad thing to allow you to re-explore the character and take this character in potentially a new direction, although that functionally annoys me for a lot of reasons, it also means that every single thing that this character has done to date is now irrelevant. At least from that character's narrative. And that truly hurts his character. In the end, I think Shadow the Hedgehog exists simply because of marketability. They had a new character, they wanted to make toys, they wanted to make continued games, they wanted to make a team in the next game that featured him as a character. That game was awful, by the way. But by the end of the first game, you had a deep and complex character. Potentially one of the most deep and complex characters in the entire series. Moreover, you had a character that had probably the most powerful moment in the entire series, with maybe the exception of Gamma from the original Sonic Adventure. Both characters that symbolize self-sacrifice at the end of the day. But because you had to bring Shadow the Hedgehog back, and I'm just going to insert because of profit, you've effectively removed the most impactful moment in your entire series, and you've reduced the most interesting, complex, deep, and potentially relatable characters in your series to a generic caricature that just smolders with generic rage instead of actually being a character. I don't know why anyone would let this happen, but it did, and it's bullshit. And this, dear internet, is why Shadow the Hedgehog is bullshit.